Hi, SOSers.
Hello, saucers.
Yeah, saucers.
What up, you saucy little saucers?
Saucers, like, UFOs.
I hope it. I was thinking like sauce, like in a spaghetti.
Oh, yeah,
If you're listening to us or watching us while you're cooking, this is a very deep and a personal.
I'm just gonna let you go. In the bed, the bidet.
And I hope you would enjoy it.
Arrivederci.
Anyway, so this
goodbye?
episode has been something that we've wanted to talk about for a while.
Yes.
So it's funny. I actually kind of, I don't know if this is what inspired us to me, or like let's do this now. But there was this really fun TikTok where there was this girl who was like basically talking about how, she's like upset about her body and like, she's just like, oh, I'm just too big. But my ancestors during the potato famine, they would be so happy to know that I won't be starving anytime soon. And basically what she was talking about is epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was fascinating when you told me this.
Yeah. And it's a thing where if your body goes through a certain thing, like a famine, when you have a child, basically your body will make the baby
compensate for that.
Exactly. And I'm saying that there's a lot of different research and a lot of opposing research, and we'll get into that here because there's also research that is the opposite end of that.
Ah, interesting.
And we'll get into it, but I find this really fascinating, and I always think about it in terms of my own family and like what I've noticed is passed down and what isn't passed down, and like what things we can do. And it's also just, I'm at that age where I'm like, maybe I'll want to have a kid one day. And is this going to be something that I want to keep in mind? Like, what things can't we prevent? What things they're just going to be fucked as soon as they're going to come out of the womb, basically.
Nature versus nurture.
Yes. Nature versus nurture. I'm so fascinated with. And when I bring it up to my therapist, she's always on the side of nurture. And I feel like a lot of scientists...
In terms of that determines more?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that nature doesn't play a big hand.
Yeah.
So, for example, there are a lot of orphanages that are being studied when it comes to generational trauma and epigenetics. And in Pakistan specifically, which is interesting, for example, where despite exceptional health care and schooling, children experience similar symptoms to PTSD, anxiety, depression. And the study uncovers a possibility that the emotional trauma of separation from their parents also triggers subtle biological alterations, changes so lasting that the children might even pass it to their own offspring. An individual's experience might alter the cells, which is so fascinating.
That's fascinating to me.
And behavior of the children and grandchildren has become widely accepted. In animals, exposure to stress, cold, or high-fat diets has been shown to trigger metabolic changes in later generations. And small studies in humans exposed to traumatic conditions, among them the children of Holocaust survivors, suggest subtle biological and health changes in their children. And we'll get into that too. I just think it's so crazy that your cells can change based on the circumstances in which you find yourself, like whatever. And it makes me wonder what's happening now.
I know.
Like we're in a quarantine, like everyone and their mother has fucking COVID or has had COVID. It's like, what are we, the stress that we have from just being in quarantine in general and like this like weird state.
I wonder like if it's just, say COVID lasts all in all like 5 years. Is that enough to structurally change the DNA for generations to come? Or is this like a generations upon generations of people struggled for food and then their ancestors,
It can be a few years.
Shortly. Wow.
Like the Holocaust. So they'll get into
Yeah.
So
true.
like there's this research, and a lot of this research is done on mice and humans too. It's like, it's interesting. Like the human test subjects are like varied. They'll try to get Holocaust survivors. They'll try to get like kids in orphanages to see like varying, but a lot in mice. And in 2016, researcher Isabel Mansoy published evidence that traumatized mice raised in an enriched environment didn't pass the symptoms of trauma to their offspring. So basically that means like they would, this research was fascinating. They would awful. They would traumatize the mice. So basically, they would breed mice, and then they would take them away from their fathers, or they would take them away from their mothers, or both, and see what they would do. They would just try and separate the families as much as
Yeah.
possible. I don't know if they would starve them.
Yeah.
Basically making it hard. So they would get the offspring of those traumatized mice, put them in an enriched environment, which would mean like
Loving and full enough food.
yeah, so
and-
they would have like a bunch of wheels.
yeah.
They would have like, yeah, an abundance of water, food, like a huge cage, like enough
keep
to roam
them with their
around.
family.
Exactly. But they were, a descendant of, they were born traumatized. So they noticed the mice were born kind of anxious, but then would raise them in this enriched environment. And then they realized they didn't like, basically they weren't traumatized anymore.
Yeah, they weren't like held to their.
Yeah, Mansoy says her lab is now working on an expanded study suggesting life experience can be healing as well as hurtful at the molecular level. Environmental enrichment at the right time could eventually help correct some of the alterations which are induced by trauma.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm obsessed with true crime. And so I've seen so many, and you have to, like, so many documentaries on serial killers in particular. And, there are some genetic things that might indicate that this person has sociopathic tendencies, or, there's some genetic things that could indicate that. But oftentimes what they are always saying in these documentaries, I mean, like the Ted Bundys and the, like, crazy serial killers of the world, they always go back to family trauma, and it's either sexual abuse or some type of abuse from in their core family, from their mother or father, and it goes that early on. And then the psychologists that they have come on those shows are often talking about, like, well, there are certain genetic similarities between serial killers, but those are not the determining factors of whether somebody will become one. Then it's environmental, and it's your family structure, and it's how much love you are given as a child, and that's the nurture part of it.
It's so interesting. Like, I was going into this episode really on and throughout for I would say a good part of my adult life, thinking that, like, basically, if it's in your genetic makeup, nurture can only do so much. I don't know why. I think it was just like a stubborn sort of.
Like a cynical.
Thank you. 100% belief that, and I think, and we can talk about how this affects us personally. Like, for me, I take solace in the fact that basically, like they say, if it's epigenetic, it's responsive to the environment, which means negative environmental effects are likely reversible. That's really nice to hear, because for me, growing up, and my parents are amazing, loving people. I love you, Mom and Dad. But anxiety 100% runs in our family. Anxiety about a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in the topic of generational trauma, and hopefully maybe we can talk to like a specialist or researcher who knows more about it than us, obviously. But I've been interested in thinking about, my grandparents and then their parents, and like knowing what they've been through. And I'm thinking like, I was born with this kind of anxiety because my grandparents, moved here from Puerto Rico, like had nothing. And I also remember, I don't know if you heard, I forget, some therapist might have said this, or psychologist, basically coming out of the 2016 election and the pandemic. They're like, if your body, this is in the early 2021, if you're feeling a type of way that you haven't felt before, if you're feeling a new type of anxiety, a new type of depression that you can't quite figure out why you're feeling this type of way, it's because your body waits for a time where it starts to feel safe.
Oh, I've heard that.
To begin manifesting physical and emotional symptoms. And I think about that in terms of generational trauma.
It's like you're not in fight or flight anymore, so you have time to stuff starts to process.
Exactly. And think about, like, breakups or grief. If you lose somebody, sometimes when you're right in the moment, when you hear about a loss, I mean, grief works its way.
Yeah, but it's almost like you're numb at first.
Exactly, and it's your shock.
Mm-hmm.
That is all stressor responses that
Yeah.
your body is doing to make sure you can survive. It's all survival, and I
Yeah.
wonder if that kind of survival instinct was there with my ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, because when you're an immigrant, I mean, they're from Puerto Rico, so it's not technically right. But when you're coming to the States with not knowing the language,
Mm-hmm.
tensions are high, racial tensions are really high in New York, and and my grandparents are also blind.
Yeah.
There's so much that they had to overcome. Not to say that they didn't have they didn't have anxiety. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
outwardly, showing those signs of anxiety, but I wonder maybe if it was something that was, I don't know, suppressed.
I'm sure. I mean, even just being blind alone, because I don't know if you guys know this, listeners, but her grandma and grandpa were blind.
Yeah.
Blind. So it's like that alone
Yeah.
is going to cause anxiety in a world like this.
Yeah. And I think, and I'm also very stubborn. Like, I need glasses, but I'm like, nah, I'm fixing my eyesight on my own.
Doesn't work like that. I had a Uber driver like years ago who was in the middle of writing a book about, this is the first time I heard about generational trauma, and he told me that he started it because he
That's interesting.
had this irrational fear of enclosed metal spaces, like really, really specific.
That's
He's like an elevator, the back of a moving truck, like anything. And it made no sense. And he was trying to figure it out. He was going into a lot of therapists. It was really bad though. Like he couldn't get in an elevator, and he had nothing in his life that tied to that. No experiences of trauma around that. And he finally came in touch with a generational trauma counselor or therapist, and they explained to him the concept of this. And then it caused him to do some diving into his family history, and he learned that either his grandfather or his great grandfather had died in an enclosed metal space. I think it was the back of a truck, but it was an enclosed metal space, and very, very, very specific. And it just enthralled him. This concept he was just taken with it, and he's writing a book about it. And that was the first I had heard of it, because I was like, you hear about passing on hair color or genetic traits, but you can't pass on a fear of of metal spaces. And then, but he was, I wish I knew his name or the book, because he was going down the list of all these scientific connections between these things that can be passed down just as much as your hair color or your skin color.
Yeah.
And I was blown away, because I had never heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
And that was probably in 2016.
That fascinates me so much, because I think about weird, not phobias, but fears that I've had since I was young that aren't explainable. Like there's no, like for example, since I was younger, have had such a fear of burning down my house.
Oh yeah.
Weird.
You've said that.
Weird fear of burning down my house.
To be fair, you almost did burn down your apartment.
I almost, oh my God, I almost did. And it was wild. Like, it was one of those things where
but this fear started before that.
Yeah. Oh, since I was, as long as I can remember. And it got worse when I was a teenager, because I would always straighten my hair every morning.
Yeah.
Early 2000s. Okay.
No.
I straighten my hair every morning. But I would have this fear that I would leave the straightener on and burn my house. So I would have to take a picture on my early cell phone, my little flip phone, of the unplugged straightener,
to prove to yourself,
to prove to myself. And it was just so bad. And it's so interesting. And I meet my husband, I meet Ryan, and his house had burned down when he was a kid.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that's so weird. I'm just like, and he doesn't even have
the fear of it.
No, he leaves a fucking stove on, and I'm like,
oh my God. And the water running, Ryan.
And I'm just like, where does that come from? Where that can actually happen to you, but he doesn't have that kind of, that's nurture for him in that respect.
I know, that's true.
So, but what if our kids are going to have that fear because he suppressed his?
And you already fear it.
And I already fear it.
And then I wonder about, I used to have, I'm remembering now, this fear of natural disasters, like really, really bad fear, to the point where when I was in, we were living in Colorado, I was in kindergarten. I wasn't even in first grade yet. And I remember, I don't know how long this lasted. I think my parents said a couple months, where before bed, I would my dad would sit on my bed and be tucking me in, and I would have to go through every natural disaster I could think of and ask him, Dad, is there going to be a flood? And he'd just say, no. Dad, is there going to be an earthquake? No. Dad, is there going to be a fire? No. Just for that coming night, because I was, and you're at the age where you just believe that, okay, Dad says no, it's not going to happen. You don't even question, like, how does he know this?
Right.
But yeah, I literally had to go down the list, and he would just sit there patiently. I'm like, there'd be flood, fire, earthquake, anything I could think of. And I was terrified of it.
I mean, what are the chances that either one of your ancestors or this past life
I know the past life thing is another thing.
we need to schedule, if saucers, if you're listening, Moira Michelle, if you remember that episode, she'd be great for finding out things like this, because that's fascinating. Like, I mean, what are the chances that, like, you could have been killed, or an ancestor of yours could have been killed in a natural disaster, and mine maybe in a fire?
Yeah. What if they were friends and they were both in a fire? That's a natural disaster. The disaster.
Oh my God, like a wildfire.
Yeah.
In the woods.
Yeah.
There were witches.
There were witches. Everything makes sense now. We solved it, guys. But really, we also should do an episode on past lives, because I'm fascinated.
So fascinated.
Could be any of the above.
But so that was more of like kind of the nature side of this equation. And when it comes to nurture, there's a lot of more evidence that backs this up, which is a really positive thing. It makes me feel better, especially if I am thinking about trying to have a kid, and making myself feel better about like the environment in which I raise the child, that it's like they're not starting out kind of
disadvantaged for stuff. Like I think about my mom. She lost her mom when she was very young, and like that's so traumatic, and her childhood was less than ideal in a lot of ways. And the life that she provided for me and my brother and my dad, obviously, but my mom's childhood was like not the best. And that's just nurture that she's like given to us. So you definitely have the ability to like counteract those things, it appears.
I mean, yeah, it's so interesting how it works. There's this really cool thing. It's called, in the book, it's called In Nurture Effect, How the Science of Human Behavior Can Improve Our Lives and Our World, by Dr. Anthony Biglin. He's a pioneer in the field of behavioral science, and he reveals the key to raising better young citizens and building a healthier society, along with clear, specific action and steps to leverage its power for individuals, families, schools, and finally for all society. So he works a lot basically proving the nurture effect. And he has all these programs where he kind of puts this into action. And one program mentioned in his book is called the Nurse Family Partnership. And it provides support to poor first-time mothers during their pregnancy and through the first 2 years of a baby's life. It helps them give birth to healthy infants, become skilled patient with their children, get more education and better jobs, and raise children with more social and emotional skills. And in the first study evaluating the Nurse Family Partnership, children whose mothers had received the program ended up at age 15 exhibiting half the level of delinquency as children whose mothers did not receive the program. Half. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's how much like you could be disadvantaged and be born to a single mom, or who's having stressors of her lives, drug related or not. But if you put this child in an environment where it has the proper schooling, the proper education, the proper programs, so they can better their emotional and physical life, they, the study shows half of them exhibit half a level of delinquency as children whose mothers did not receive that program. So, and
like the amount of early developmental years, obviously we are always told are the most important, because if you think about it, we don't take kids that seriously a lot of times as adults. However, they become fluent in a foreign language in like 2 years, and they're sponges, and so the things that they're taking in those years are significant. And this is, so the good behavior game is something that helps elementary school students develop self-regulation and cooperation skills that nurture their social and academic success, even into adulthood. small teams of children earn simple rewards for working cooperatively in class. Rewards such as brief, fun things that kids love to do, like making silly sounds for 10 seconds. Like, it's not even like food rewards, you know? It's
Yeah.
like you can just make a silly sound for 10 seconds. One study showed that children who played the game merely in first or second grade only were less likely to smoke or get arrested by middle school. And by young adulthood, they had fewer problems with drugs, criminal behavior, or suicide, and were more likely to graduate high school and attend college.
So interesting. It's like that
Yeah.
reward, like simple reward. It's not like they needed candy or something
Right.
specific. It
It's
was
a
just something that
reward.
made them happy.
And it's like acknowledgement
Yeah.
of your behavior. Like, you know, with kids that were often the worst behaved, quote unquote, whether that's in high school or any, they just have no one monitoring their behavior. Their parents don't care where they are. Their teachers aren't really paying attention. And so they don't have structure, and they don't have anyone to look to who's like, am I going to disappoint this person? This person gave me rules and I'm breaking them. Just no one cares. No one's watching you. And so having that attention on your behavior and being rewarded and acknowledged for it is huge.
Yep. Um, I have another theory after I go into this next thing about
Yes.
about how important this study is. So another study by Barbara Friedrichsen and her colleagues at the University of North Carolina and the University of Michigan, she's big in this world, found that people randomly assigned to a program that taught them to do brief loving kindness meditations about themselves and others experienced increased positive emotions and increased positive psychological resources such as a greater sense of purpose in life, more social support, and decreased illness. These increased personal resources were associated with more life satisfaction and fewer depressive symptoms. In another study, Friedrichsen and colleagues showed that people who express well-being associated with striving toward meaning and a noble purpose beyond simple gratification showed lower levels of the expression of pro-inflammatory genes that are implicated in cardiovascular,
Wow.
neurodegenerative, and neoplastic diseases.
Wow.
So it's like doing these, it's like a fucking meditation. It's like
It is.
positive
It's like
meditation.
gratitude practice.
Yes, it helps lower obviously all of these stressors in your life. And you're going to have a better physical life because of that too. You'll have less of a chance of getting any sort of cardiovascular disease, any other degenerative diseases that are so, prevalent. Like a lot of people have those things today. It's like the number one killer cardiovascular disease, at least in women.
And to assume that medical, like our physical health, it has nothing to do with our mental and emotional state. I mean, I hope there's no one at this point who believes that they're disconnected, but I know a lot of people don't really respect the connection that's there because it honestly, it's proven in so many studies too that and it's kind of obnoxious to be like, because there is such a thing as toxic positivity, but
Yes.
also,
Performative.
yeah, like, but I have an uncle who battled cancer and he is his outlook on life is so rose-colored glasses, and I mean, he just sees the beauty in everything. He has this childlike joy about him, and he went through that and he recovered. And it's just like, you know, there's a lot of stories like that though, and there's studies that really connect the mental and emotional state with the physical state, especially in people who are already diagnosed and sick. Their treatment recovery rates are higher. It's not a joke.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
it's really not.
It's amazing. And one thing that I was thinking throughout this whole reading all these amazing studies is that, and you'll back me up on this, these studies are so important to understand how fucked so many communities in this country are. And when it comes to the blatant sexism, racism, well, sexism too, classism, racism. When it comes to underdeveloped cities that, you know, aren't funded, aren't cared for in the way they need to, because these studies prove anything, it's that they need more help.
And if they prove anything, it's that these are not inherent, these problems of poverty or violence in these neighborhoods. It's not a thing of nature. It's a nurture situation, and in a society that completely ignores and disrespects and damages and all the, you know, people of color, the lower working class, which is often people of color. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just a cycle that is perpetuated. And then people look at it and they're like, well, I don't know, it's not my fault all the poor people are black. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
It makes me think, like, if these studies were covered by like Fox News, all those pundits would, their heads would spin talking about this,
Yes.
because all they really like to talk about is, you know, these people need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, it's like, it's their fault. You know, black and black crime. Look what they do. Look what they do to themselves. It's like, what are you fucking talking about?
First of all,
what kind of life have we left for them to do? Like, look at how underfunded. Look at the schooling in those systems. Look at the welfare that, you know, and the food stamps that's needed for these families. It's
black on black crime to me is like, that is the dumbest thing you can ever bring up, because it's like, first of all, they're in neighborhoods where white people fled because or redlining, or it was just white flight, and so there's only black people in the neighborhood because white people don't want to go over there. It's just like, oh my God, we could go on. That is it, but that's a really good
I just feel like
connection. It proves it.
Yeah, 100%.
Completely proves it, but people don't want to tie it to that. They want to stick to this is just mother to kids, or mother and father to daughter and son, and that's how this relates. But actually relates societally between communities, and who we put our resources into and our love into and our attention to, and that's who thrives. It's kind of a no-brainer.
So I just hope, if you're kind of thinking what I was thinking when I was talking about it earlier about, you know, an anxiety about the future generations, because I really do. I have this anxiety about the future generations because the world is just so fucking bleak and weird right now. And I worry personally of just like, you know, passing on the anxieties that I can't quite pinpoint or understand. And is that fair? You know?
Right.
But these studies are really positive. And I think, if anything, if you are right, if you're, you know, getting yourself right, whether that's meditating, going to a therapist, getting yourself right, whatever that means for you, you don't have to have those kind of anxieties for future generations. You can be positive as long as you are providing the best life you can for whatever child in your life, niece, nephew, or your own.
Yeah, exactly. Children, and also for yourself, though. It's also, it's really, going back to the serial killer thing. I often think about, you know, when they interview, like Oprah interviewed this girl whose father was a serial killer, and she was on, and I've often wondered when I see the kids of these people interviewed, like, how do you reconcile in your mind, obviously, that like someone that you potentially love did these things, but also how do you separate yourself from, that's in my genes. Like and this is proof that you know, like, you might have one gene that could lean one way or the other, and you decide what your life looks like from there. And that's like, it's a mental thing to release ourselves from. That's obviously an extreme example, but you know, just because something runs in our family, you know, the stories we tell ourselves really matter for who we view ourselves to be. Jordan, one time, our resident astrologer, Jordan,
said have her on again soon.
I know, we gotta have her back. She told me one time that she was told something by, like, I don't know if it was teachers or her mom, or just like in passing, she remembered her mom telling her teachers, well, Jordan gets overwhelmed easily, so blah, 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 you know, at teacher conferences. And Jordan's like, that just became a thing that I told myself my whole life. Like, but I get overwhelmed easily, so I better be careful with, I do get overwhelmed easily. And then she, like, you know, a number of years back was like, I can reprogram this because I don't have to tell myself that story about myself. And it wasn't done with any malintent by her mom. It's like, maybe she got overwhelmed easily when she was 6 with her homework. You know what I mean? It's like, but we tell ourselves these stories, and we can reprogram. It's not easy, but we can reprogram those things.
Yeah, it's so true. I love the idea of frameworking and reprogramming. It's such a thing. And this kind of goes along with this. There's this quote by Brene Brown. I love her so much. And she talks about how people might, and I'll ask you, like, do you ever find yourself rehearsing trauma responses? And specifically, like, rehearsing maybe in your head, like not actually go in front of a mirror, but like, God forbid someone close to you had died. Like you kind of just like sitting there, like in that grief, even a little bit.
Yes.
Just kind of just
Yes.
because,
Oh my God.
yeah.
Mhm.
So humans do that a lot. If you do that, you're not alone. I do that all the time.
Mhm.
And there's this beautiful thing where she says, if you do that, it's obviously a waste of time for many reasons. But the number one thing is because you're limiting yourself on joy, right? If you're taking the time out to be sad about something that has not happened yet and might not happen for a very
Yeah.
long time, then you are taking yourself away from a moment of joy. And why that is so harmful is because joy is what helps us become resilient. And if you
Oh, wow.
framework that and you reprogram it to think about that, it's so helpful because you just kind of get your mind out of it. Like you can get to that place really easily when you're just
Right.
like, fuck, my dog's gonna,
And you think that you're maybe rehearsing or like preparing yourself for it, but in actuality, you're not able to do anything in that moment that would help you deal with it better when it happens.
No. You have to reprogram yourself. You
Yeah.
have to choose joy. You have to choose happiness. That's really what it is. Happiness doesn't happen. You have to choose it because that's what makes you resilient when the time comes, when those moments
When you
happen,
need it.
when you need it. The joy is what'll help you to get to the other side of that. So don't ever limit yourself from that. Don't ever take yourself
Yeah.
away from that.
I like that. And it also reminded me of what Jordan had told me for her. One of the tools she used to reprogram herself was she thought of like, I think 5 limiting beliefs that she told herself about herself her whole life. I'm easily overwhelmed. I'm whatever they may be. And so write that sentence down, then write the opposite. Like, she say something like, I can handle as much as I choose to, whatever the opposite statement of that is. And then every day she said she would write each of those sentences, the new sentences, the opposites, in her journal every day. And while she's doing it, like pay attention, not just blindly writing it. And she's like, for a long time, like a number of months, I just felt like I'm going through the motions. This is bullshit. This isn't really true, but I'll just write it. And I think she said after like 4 or 5 months, she started, as she's writing these things, she's like, this is true. I am capable of these things. And it took, months of her doing it every day and feeling like a fraud a lot of those days while she's writing these statements down. But that is one exercise to like reprogram your mind about how you view yourself.
I love that. I think we've talked about
we have
a little bit, and I need to kind of return to that and like do that again because
Me too.
it is so fucking important to choose the life you want to live. Choose the positivity and the joy in your life.
Yeah. If the CIA can brainwash people into thinking thoughts they want them to think, we surely can reprogram ourselves into thinking better thoughts.
Absolutely. So basically, we're going to link all the articles that helped us form this episode. So check out the show notes. Also, guys, check out our Patreon.
Yes.
We have a Patreon and it's really cool because we have like extended interviews, videos. We've got merch, exclusive merch.
And it's only going to get better from here.
Exactly. And $3, $7, $11. I ain't that much a month. And shout out to Steve and Nija for being OG patrons. We love you.
We love you.
Shout out Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Follow us on, subscribe to us on YouTube, SOS with Molly and Alyssa. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the SOS Pod. Subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you find your podcasts. We're there. Yeah.
And I'm Molly Cottrell.
I'm Alyssa Rosano.
Here's to turning meltdowns
into magic.